So in today's mock overview, I'm going to be giving you guys a complete walkthrough of this build here. It is comprised of two buildings, as you can see, both of which are residential, which is kind of unique for my city because most of my buildings have ground floor commercial. But these ones I want to do something a little bit different. So let's jump right into it. This first side of the building I'm showing you right here is what I first started building. I knew I wanted to have it be the start of a hill section in my city. So I knew I was going to have to build a little bit of a natural sort of rock element to show that the building is actually elevated onto, like, almost think of like a retaining wall, so that it can work well with an actual slope. You'll see here too, I've also started to do a new cobblestone technique. And then what I'm showing you right here is just the back side of that wall, where you can see I've actually got ingots and tiles that have kind of slid out on different lengths, just to give it a little bit more depth. And I think it turned out really nicely. It gives it a certain nice little natural feel to it, where most of my buildings are very just straight up and down buildings. So I wanted it to feel like it was fitting into the landscape of a hill. I really tried to cram as much greenery as I could here in detail in this section, between the small terracotta sort of awning roof over the window, the vines, the potted plants, even the gutter, which is something I'd like to put in more of my builds, but I really enjoyed just really focusing in on like the vignette of that window. And also using these pink flowers was really fun because it just gives it a little bit of color. I use a lot of similar colors throughout my landscaping, but the pink really helped break this area up and make it pop in the city. So now, like I said earlier, I knew this was going to be the start of my hill section. And you can see here, this is the technique I've used to build it up. It's really quite simple. I just use a bunch of random bricks and then these really great like support, like technique, almost like a girder. And it really helped just gets elevation quickly. And as long as you position them properly, you can make them pretty strong. And so that was a really helpful piece that I used. I bought these in bulk last year because I knew I was going to need them for the elevation. You can see that the actual, ramp or hill is just sitting there. It's not really attached to anything. And I was able to just get the angle exactly how I wanted it. It took a little bit of experimenting with different sloped pieces underneath, but overall it looks really nice. So focusing back in on the building, the wooden door was really fun to build. I try to build wooden doors in a lot of my builds, and this one was actually really fun because it just kind of came together. I didn't really have a vision for it. I didn't use any real photos for inspiration, but I'm really happy with how the shape of the door and those arch pieces just kind of give it a really nice overall shape and add something unique to the build. And I will say that building on a slope was the first time I'd ever done this, so it was kind of interesting on how to position the building. And I knew that I needed to be flexible in how I laid things out. And that's why I just took the 16 by 16 plate, or I think it's 12 by 16, and just kind of set it in there, and it rests on those two slopes. And it makes it really easy to just place the building, and it kind of, the slope worked out nicely. So really pleased with that. Another key component was making sure that the angles worked when it got to the top of the hill, so that there wasn't any big jarring gaps. So that worked out quite nicely. Moving to some of the balcony details of this building, you can see it's not overly ornate, but I wanted it to feel detailed and intentional. Used some nice snot techniques there on this little potted plant kind of balcony, I guess you'd call it. But yeah, it worked really nice. And those kind of curved slopes that have a little bit of a jagged edge. Again, just add a little bit of detail instead of using just a basic 1x2 slope or 2x2 slope, something to give it a little bit of variation. And then the dark green shutters, which are very common in Italy, I made these so that it looked like one shutter was open, one was closed, just so when the light comes out, it looks a little different. And then obviously you can see here, similar technique with the shutters, but these are done in a much more traditional fashion, just on the outside of the window. And overall, I think it turned out really nice. And this side of the building I really enjoy. I think that it feels very natural, it feels very Italian, and it's exactly what I was kind of going for. So moving up to the roof, this is probably one of my uglier terracotta roofs because the roof sits a little crooked. It was still when I was figuring out the angles for it, and you can see that there's this big ugly gap in the middle. I didn't know what to do with it, so I figured, you know what, I'm just going to cover it with some landscaping. And it worked out really nicely. It was a really simple technique that I've attached it with the 1x1 modified plate with the hinge and then a clip. And overall, I think it really works. And until you get really close to the build on this angle, you can see the gap. But I liked having the vines pretty much climb up the entire building onto the roof and onto this little top floor patio, and it turned out really nice. So moving here, you can see I've done some uh, not very clever techniques with the wires. It's pretty ugly. This is definitely the side of the build you don't see in my city, but that's okay. You know, it's hidden, so it doesn't bother me, and it gets the lights all up there, so that worked. And one of the things I was most pleased with, though, was this top floor patio, and you can see the little bit of the pergola and the vines and the potted plants hanging. But I've also run that light into the actual white nose cone. I've inverted and then put a flame piece in there, so it's like a candlelit dinner. So you can see here the technique I used to hang the potted plants was just a simple 1x2 rounded plate with the open studs, and then connected it into the potted plants. So overall, I think this turned out really nicely. It flows well with the rest of the landscaping in the build. Got some pink flowers continuing to grow up, and it feels very overgrown and lush. And that was exactly what I was going for. So I was really pleased with that, and I was surprised that I was able to fit this table, the chairs, the wire, everything just fit. It's pretty snug, but it feels very dense and overgrown with the potted plants. And I was able to even put in a little bit of detailing on the tiling with the white and the dark orange, which was really nice. And you can see here one of the little details I've carried over from the Cantina MOC were these white busts, because this build sits right next to the Cantina, so it kind of gives it a sense of continuity, which is quite nice. So moving on to the next building, you can see this one is quite simple. I wanted to try to add some detail. I wanted to use sand green just because it was a color I hadn't used in my city yet, and just break it up a little bit. I like this wooden door a lot because it's got the little black detail at the top, and using things like the paintbrush in the middle was just fun. I don't love the vines. I kind of need to go back and change it and add a little bit more foliage around it. I do really like the use of the beehive as the light. At night, it shines a really nice little circular glow down on the door, which is fun. And then moving to the second level, again, this is a pretty simple build, but it was just nice to do things like the little wrought iron balcony, throw in a couple quick plants, and then you can see I've covered again the gap on the terracotta roof adjacent to it with some landscaping, threw in a potted plant kind of hanging off the wall so that it really distracts the eye from some of the ugly gaps of the build, because they're definitely there. And again, just simple texturing like I do in most of my builds with the ingots and rounded plates, tiles, things like that. And just a little splash of color with the white and the bright yellow awning. One of the things I really like about this build, though, is this section of the terracotta roof. It goes kind of in line with the little terracotta roof awning on the other building over the window. Using these dark orange ingots and the medium nougat 1x2 tiles is a really, really nice effect, and it's really simple if you want to get a terracotta roof, but you don't want to do the whole 1x1 rounded brick and all the complex techniques that go with it. This is a really easy, simple way to do it. And here I have them overlapping. You can do them where they're not necessarily as overlapping, so you don't have to build the roof up quite as much. But overall, I think it was really nice, and it just makes it feel like it flows and it's contiguous with the building next to it. So moving to the back side of this building, I've actually left myself a little bit of room for some future development, because I want to put another building in this little section with these stairs behind it. I've got to build it up quite a bit so that it will actually be taller than the building in front of it. But eventually I need to come back to it, because I think it would add a really nice sense of density to the city and make it feel really jammed in. I just haven't had the time, and I've been focused on other projects, but I wanted to make sure I tried to create as much building area in here and really challenge myself to make these buildings small. So you can see now, I'll show you a little bit more of how the roof was built. This one is pretty simple. It's just some modified hinge plates, and stuck the roof on top of it, and put some dark orange plates on the base. And that's really it. Again, I don't see this angle of the roof when I'm looking at my city, so I don't really care that it's awkward, weird colors and things kind of put in different places. Doesn't really bother me. You can see obviously on this side, as we start to look to the other terracotta roof, it is very, very ugly. This was a new technique I used here, where I put modified snot bricks in the terracotta roof, then attached plates on the backside, and then used 2x2 round tiles, one with the stud and one with the hole, to then connect it to the hinge plate, which sits on a jumper, just so I could get the right angle and depth. This was a lot of time and frustration, and honestly, I don't love the finished result. You can see there the snot bricks I was mentioning before, which connect to the plate behind it. Again, it's okay. I don't know if I'll go back and fix it. It works for now, but yeah, I mean, this is a good technique if you do want to do some kind of angled roof. It works. Not the best, but it works. So that's how I did the terracotta roof on here. But overall, I'm really happy with this build. It was a fun one, and it was a good challenge for me to force myself to build on a smaller footprint and also build with an elevation and understanding how that kind of works with the overall building. So I do think, though, that the pergola here at the top and the little candle at dinner is probably, for me, the highlight of the build. So let me know what you guys like about the build if you have any questions, and we'll see you in the next one.